A cubic polynomial cuts the x-axis at x equals 3, cuts the y-axis at y equals minus 3, and just touches the x-axis at x equals minus 1. Find the function that describes this cubic. Now, here is a bit of information about what to do when you have a question describing x-axis intercepts. When you have information about x-axis intercepts in a cubic, you can write out the general form looking like this, with a coefficient at the front and then a bracket corresponding to each of your x-intercepts. Now, so you can start by finding those values B, C, and D based on the x-intercepts in the question. And this could even be from a graph. You could have seen a sketch where you can see each of the x-axis intercepts, and those are the ones that we'll put into the formula. And then once you've found all those intercepts and put them into the formula, you should be at a place where there's only one unknown, which is the coefficient A, and you can substitute one other coordinate in to find that value. One other thing to remember is if there's a repeated root, which in this question there is, because we said that the graph just touches the x-axis. That's a sign that there's a repeated root, and that corresponds to one of the linear terms being squared. So the formula starts to look like this instead. So one of the brackets actually is squared, and there's one less brackets overall. Well, I guess it's still the same amount of brackets if we had written it out like this, but it would just mean that there's only one less variable if we write it in the squared form. Okay, so in this question, we're actually looking at this form because we have the just touches situation going on. So I'll write that form out. You need to be able to write these forms out, the general forms, without a formula sheet. They're usually assumed knowledge. It's from your knowledge of how cubics work. This is why we focus so much on what it looked like with a repeated root or how many x-intercepts it might have and the turning point. All of that sketching knowledge is now coming back because we're using our general forms to help us construct equations. All right, let's start by summarizing the information. So it cuts the x-axis at x equals to 3. So it cuts at, and I can write the coordinate 3, 0. It cuts the y-axis, so the y-intercept is at 0, minus 3. Just touches at x equals to 1. So this is a repeated root. Repeated root at minus 1, 0. That's all the information that we're given. Now we can see from here and here, these are the parts that will correspond to the x-intercepts. So this is an x-intercept, and then this is an x-intercept. But this is the repeated root one. So the one inside the square, this is the repeated root. And then anything else is where it could cut the x-axis. All right, so if it cuts the x-axis at positive 3, then we have to put minus 3 into the bracket. So I'm going to replace that with x minus 3. We're basically doing like reversing the null factor law, because if I said that that's equal to 0 from the null factor law, you'll see that x is equal to 3, which is the coordinate. So if I think about that in reverse, it means that in the bracket, I need to have minus 3. And you can just think of it as swapping the sign, which is why in the general form, there's a minus there. All right, and now the repeated root. So the repeated root corresponds to minus 1. So when I see C, I'll put minus 1 and I'll swap the sign. So I have x plus 1 squared. Because this is the repeated root, this is the one that has to be squared. That's really important. Okay, so we've got a formula now with only one unknown, A. That's a really good place to be because now we can just solve that using algebra with the last piece of information. So going through our list of information, we've used these two because we use them to find the B and the C. So the only thing we haven't used is the y-intercept, which we can use now to find the last unknown, which is A. So let's substitute 0, minus 3, which is like letting x equals to 0 and y equal to minus 3. So I have A times 0 minus 3, 0 plus 1 squared, minus 3 is equal to A times minus 3, and 1 squared is just 1, and I can actually just erase this because it's still the same, and I can divide both sides by -3, giving us a is equal to 1. Awesome. So we've got that information, but remember, we have to state the full equation because that's what the question's asking for. So my final answer is, I'll replace a with 1, which is the same as not writing it. So y is equal to x minus 3, x plus 1 squared. And a good way to check, if you have time, is to go through each of the pieces of information that we've been given and check that we do go through those coordinates, and even better, check that those are the behaviors that we expect. So we expect there to be a repeated root at x equals to -1, and for it to cut the x-axis at x equals to 3, and we also expect it to have a y-intercept of -3. So that's a good thing to check on a test if you have enough time.